Karen thought she had the perfect plan. Frame her boss for harassment and watch his life crumble. But she didn't know he was friends with the arresting officer, who was about to expose her twisted scheme and deliver a bittersweet dose of justice. Karen stormed out of the office, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor. Her boss, Michael, had denied her latest request for a promotion, and she was livid. This was the last straw. She had given that company her blood, sweat, and tears for nearly a decade, and they still refused to recognize her talents. As she sat in her car, seething, an idea began to form in her mind. A twisted, devious plan that would bring Michael down once and for all. She would file a police report, accusing him of harassment. It would be her word against his, and with her impeccable reputation, no one would dare question her. That evening, Karen marched into the police station, her eyes welling with fabricated tears. "Officer, I need to report an incident of workplace harassment," she said, her voice trembling. "My boss has been making inappropriate comments and advances for months, and I can't take it anymore." The officer listened intently, his brow furrowing with concern. "I'm so sorry to hear that, ma'am. Can you tell me more about what happened?" Karen spun a web of lies, describing in vivid detail how Michael had cornered her in the break room and made lewd suggestions. "I'm afraid to go back to work," she said, her bottom lip quivering. "I don't feel safe there anymore." The officer nodded solemnly. "Don't worry, we'll look into this right away. Can you give me your boss's name and the address of your workplace?" "Of course," Karen replied, rattling off the information with practiced ease. "His name is Michael Atwood, and we work at Apex Consulting on Main Street." The officer's eyes widened slightly, and he paused for a moment. "Apex Consulting, you say?" he murmured, almost to himself. Then he cleared his throat and continued, "Okay, Miss Calhoun, we'll dispatch an officer to the office first thing in the morning to investigate. In the meantime, please stay safe and don't hesitate to call us if you have any other concerns." As Karen left the police station, a smug grin spread across her face. Phase 1 of her plan was complete. Now, all she had to do was sit back and watch Michael's world crumble. Little did she know, the officer she had just spoken to was none other than Michael's longtime friend, Officer Davis, and he was about to blow her carefully crafted scheme wide open. The next morning, Officer Davis walked briskly through the glass doors of Apex Consulting, his uniform crisp and his expression stern. He approached the receptionist's desk, flashing his badge. "Ma'am, I need to speak with your boss, Michael Atwood, immediately," he said. "It's a matter of some urgency." The receptionist, caught off guard, quickly paged Michael, who emerged from his office, a look of confusion on his face. "Michael, I'm Officer Davis. We need to talk," the officer said, his eyes narrowing. Michael's brow furrowed. "Of course, officer. What's this about?" "I received a complaint of workplace harassment from one of your employees, a Ms. Karen Calhoun," Officer Davis said, his tone clipped. "She alleges that you've been making inappropriate advances and comments towards her." Michael's eyes widened in shock. "That's impossible. Karen and I have a professional relationship. I've never done anything to make her uncomfortable." Officer Davis nodded slowly. "That's what I suspected. You see, I happen to be an old friend of yours, Michael, and I know you're not the kind of man who would behave that way." Michael's shoulders visibly relaxed, and he let out a deep breath. "Thank God. I was worried this was going to turn into some kind of nightmare scenario." "Well, it just might be," Officer Davis said, his expression grave. "I have a feeling Miss Calhoun may have fabricated this entire complaint, and I intend to get to the bottom of it." He paused, fixing Michael with a serious look. "This is a serious accusation, Michael. If it's found to be false, there could be serious consequences for the person who filed it. I need you to be completely honest with me, no matter how uncomfortable it might be." Michael nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Of course, Officer Davis. I have nothing to hide. Whatever you need, I'm here to help." As the two men stepped into Michael's office, Karen watched from the shadows, her heart pounding. She hadn't counted on the officer knowing her boss personally. This could complicate things, but she was determined to see her plan through, no matter the cost. Inside Michael's office, the tension was palpable. Officer Davis sat across from his old friend, his expression unreadable. "All right, Michael, I need you to tell me everything," the officer said, his voice low and serious. "What's your relationship with Karen Calhoun like?" Michael leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Karen is one of my best employees. She's been with the company for almost a decade, and she's always been a hard worker and a team player. I've always tried to treat her and all my employees with the utmost respect." Officer Davis nodded, his gaze unwavering. "So you've never made any inappropriate comments or advances towards her?" "Absolutely not," Michael replied, shaking his head emphatically. "Karen and I have a strictly professional relationship. I can't imagine why she would make up such a serious accusation." The officer's brow furrowed as he considered this. "Well, that's what I'm here to find out. You say you two have a good working relationship. Is there anything that might have happened recently that could have caused some tension or conflict between you?" Michael thought for a moment, his expression troubled. "Actually, yes. Just yesterday, Karen came to me requesting a promotion and a substantial pay raise. I told her that while I appreciate her hard work, I couldn't justify those changes at this time. She seemed quite upset, but I never imagined she would retaliate like this." Officer Davis leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "I see. So you believe this could be a case of retaliation, then?" "It's the only thing that makes sense," Michael said, his brow furrowed. "Karen is an ambitious woman, and I think she felt entitled to that promotion. When I didn't give it to her, she must have hatched this plan to try and get back at me." The officer nodded slowly. "That's what I was thinking as well. This has the hallmarks of a false accusation motivated by personal grievances, rather than any actual wrongdoing on your part." He paused, his expression hardening. "Well, if that's the case, then Karen Calhoun is in serious trouble. Falsifying a police report is a criminal offense, and I intend to get to the bottom of this." Michael leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Do what you have to do, Officer Davis. I want this resolved, and I want Karen to be held accountable for her actions." Outside the office, Karen paced nervously, her heart racing. She could hear the muffled voices of the two men, and she knew her plan was unraveling. But she wasn't about to give up without a fight. Karen's palms were sweating as she watched Officer Davis emerge from Michael's office, his expression grim. She steeled herself, ready to put on her most convincing performance. "Miss Calhoun, I'd like to have a word with you," the officer said, his voice stern. Karen feigned surprise, her eyes wide. "Of course, officer. What can I do for you?" "I've been speaking with your boss, Michael Atwood, about the harassment complaint you filed," Officer Davis said, his gaze unwavering. "And I have to say, I'm not convinced that your allegations are accurate." Karen's heart sank, but she quickly recovered, mustering up a look of concern. "I don't understand, officer. I was completely truthful in my report. Michael has been making me very uncomfortable at work for months." "Is that so?" The officer replied, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Because Michael tells me that the only recent conflict between you two was regarding a promotion he denied you. Does that sound familiar?" Karen's mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "I think you do, Miss Calhoun," Officer Davis said, his eyes narrowing. "And I have reason to believe that you fabricated this entire harassment complaint out of a desire for revenge." Karen's composure crumbled, and she felt her face flush with shame and panic. "No, that's not true. I would never do something like that." "Really?" the officer said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Because that's exactly what it looks like to me. You're accusing your boss of a serious crime, all because he didn't give you the promotion you felt you deserved." He leaned in, his expression hardening. "Let me be clear, Ms. Calhoun. Falsifying a police report is a criminal offense, and I take it very seriously. If I find that you've lied about this, you'll be facing some serious consequences." Karen swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. "But I didn't lie," she protested weakly, her voice trembling. Officer Davis shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "We'll see about that. In the meantime, I'm going to need you to come down to the station with me for further questioning." As the officer escorted Karen out of the office, Michael watched from the doorway, his expression a mix of relief and concern. He knew that this was far from over, and that Karen's actions could have serious repercussions. But for now, he was just grateful that the truth was finally starting to come to light. The ride to the police station was tense and silent. Karen stared straight ahead, her mind racing as she tried to figure out a way to salvage her plan. She couldn't believe Officer Davis had seen through her lies so easily. As they pulled into the station, Karen's heart sank. This was not how things were supposed to go. She was supposed to be the victim, not the perpetrator. And now, her entire scheme was unraveling before her eyes. Once inside, Officer Davis led Karen to an interrogation room, gesturing for her to have a seat. He then took a chair opposite her, his gaze unwavering. "All right, Ms. Calhoun, let's start from the beginning," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Tell me exactly what happened that led you to file this harassment complaint against your boss." Karen swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. "I already told you what happened," she stammered. "Michael has been making inappropriate comments and advances towards me for months." Officer Davis shook his head, his expression unimpressed. "That's not what your boss tells me. In fact, he says the only recent conflict between you two was over a denied promotion. Care to explain that?" Karen's eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for a way out. I don't know what you're talking about. Michael is lying." "Is he now?" The officer replied, his brow raised. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks an awful lot like you're the one who's been dishonest here." He leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Ms. Calhoun, I have to warn you. Falsifying a police report is a serious crime. If I determine that you've lied to me, you're going to be in a lot of trouble." Karen's hands were shaking as she tried to maintain her composure. "I'm telling you the truth," she insisted, her voice wavering. "Michael is the one who's lying." Officer Davis sighed, shaking his head. "Well, in that case, I'm going to need you to provide me with some concrete evidence to back up your claims. Otherwise, I'm going to have to assume that you're the one who's not being entirely truthful here." Karen's mind raced, scrambling to come up with a plausible explanation. But as the seconds ticked by, she knew that her carefully constructed plan was crumbling around her. The officer watched her, his expression unreadable. "The clock is ticking, Ms. Calhoun. I suggest you start telling me the truth before this gets a whole lot worse for you." The tense silence in the interrogation room was deafening. Karen sat across from Officer Davis, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she was running out of time to come up with a convincing story, but the truth was, she had nothing. "Well, Ms. Calhoun, I'm waiting," the officer said, his voice stern. "What evidence do you have to back up your claims against your boss?" Karen's mind raced, scrambling to come up with something, anything, that could save her from this predicament. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that her entire plan had been built on a foundation of lies. I don't have any evidence," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Officer Davis leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I see. So you're telling me that you filed a false police report, accusing your boss of a serious crime, without any proof to back it up." Karen felt her face flush with shame. I thought I could get away with it," she mumbled, her eyes downcast. The officer let out a heavy sigh. Miss Calhoun, do you have any idea how serious this is? You've wasted police resources, falsely accused an innocent man, and put his entire career and reputation at risk. That's not something I can just overlook. Karen felt her stomach twist with dread. Please, officer, you have to understand. I was just so angry at Michael for denying me that promotion. I thought if I could ruin his career, I could get back at him and get what I deserved. What you deserve is to be charged with filing a false police report, Officer Davis said, his voice cold. Do you have any idea what the consequences of that could be? Karen felt tears welling up in her eyes. Please, officer, don't do this. I'll do anything. I'll resign from my job. I'll pay a fine. Just please don't arrest me. The officer shook his head, his expression resolute. I'm sorry, Miss Calhoun, but that's not my decision to make. You've committed a serious crime, and I have a duty to report it to the proper authorities. As Officer Davis reached for his radio to call in backup, Karen felt her world crumbling around her. She had thought she had the perfect plan, but in the end, her own greed and ambition had been her undoing. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Karen knew that she was about to face the consequences of her actions. And this time, there would be no one to save her. The ride to the police station was a silent and somber affair. Karen sat in the back of the squad car, her wrists cuffed and her head hung low. She couldn't believe how quickly her carefully crafted plan had unraveled. As they pulled up to the station, Officer Davis escorted Karen inside, his grip firm on her arm. He led her through the bustling lobby and down a narrow hallway, finally stopping in front of a plain metal door. In here, the officer said, his voice devoid of emotion. Karen swallowed hard as she stepped into the small, dimly lit interrogation room. She took a seat at the table, her heart pounding in her chest. Officer Davis closed the door behind them and took a seat across from her, his expression unreadable. All right, Ms. Calhoun, let's go over this one more time, he said, his tone clipped. Tell me exactly what happened that led you to file a false police report against your boss. Karen felt her face flush with shame. I was just so angry at Michael for denying me that promotion, she stammered. I thought if I could get him in trouble, I could get what I deserved. The officer shook his head, his brow furrowed. So you decided to ruin an innocent man's life just to get back at him. Do you have any idea how serious that is? Karen felt the tears welling up in her eyes. I know. I didn't think it through. I just let my anger and resentment get the better of me. Well, that's going to cost you, Officer Davis said, his voice stern. Filing a false police report is a criminal offense, and I have no choice but to pursue charges against you. Karen's eyes widened in panic. Please, officer, isn't there anything I can do? I'll do anything. Just please don't arrest me. The officer leaned back in his chair, his expression unforgiving. I'm sorry, Ms. Calhoun, but the damage has already been done. You've put an innocent man through hell, and you need to face the consequences of your actions. He paused, his gaze boring into her. Now, I'm going to ask you again, and I want the truth this time. What exactly happened? Karen took a deep breath, her hands trembling. I lied. I made up the whole story about Michael harassing me. I was just so angry about the promotion, and I thought I could get back at him by ruining his reputation. Officer Davis nodded slowly, his expression grim. I see. And did you have any evidence to support your claims? Karen shook her head, her eyes downcast. No, I didn't have any evidence. I just thought I could get away with it. The officer let out a heavy sigh. Well, Ms. Calhoun, I'm afraid that's not the case. You're looking at some serious charges, and I can't just let this slide. As the weight of her actions sank in, Karen felt her heart sink. She had thought she was so clever, but in the end, her own greed and ambition had been her undoing. And now, she was facing the very real consequences of her choices. The courtroom was hushed as the judge delivered his verdict. Karen sat in the dock, her face pale and her hands trembling. She could barely believe that she was here, facing the consequences of her own foolish actions. Miss Calhoun, you have been found guilty of filing a false police report, a serious offense that has had far-reaching consequences, the judge said, his voice stern. Your actions have not only damaged the reputation and career of an innocent man, but they have also wasted valuable police resources and eroded public trust in the system. Karen swallowed hard, her eyes cast downward. She knew there was no excuse for what she had done, and she braced herself for the punishment that was about to come. The court has determined that your crime warrants a significant punishment, the judge continued. Therefore, I am sentencing you to 1 year in prison, followed by 2 years of probation. During that time, you will be required to undergo counseling and community service to help you understand the gravity of your actions and the importance of honesty and integrity. Karen's heart sank as the words sank in. A year in prison. How would she ever recover from this? She had thought she had it all figured out, but now her life was in shambles. As the bailiff moved to escort her out of the courtroom, Karen caught a glimpse of Michael, sitting in the audience. To her surprise, he wasn't gloating or celebrating her downfall. Instead, his expression was one of sadness and pity. In that moment, Karen realized the true cost of her actions. She had betrayed the trust of her boss, her colleagues, and the entire justice system, all for the sake of her own petty revenge. And now, she was paying the price. As the doors of the courtroom closed behind her, Karen felt a wave of regret wash over her. She had thought she was so clever, but in the end, her own greed and ambition had been her undoing. And now, she was facing the very real consequences of her choices.